let's talk about how Daniel 2, 7, and 8 are parallel prophecies to each other. Now in Daniel 2, we find the statue vision. This is where Babylon is identified specifically as being the head of gold. The rest of the statue was the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, the legs of iron, and then the feet and iron of clay. Now history tells us that after Babylon, Medo-Persia came and conquered them. Then Greece came and conquered Medo-Persia. Then Rome came and conquered Greece. And Rome didn't have anybody who conquered it, but rather it crumbled from within and became divided Europe. Now when we compare Daniel 2 with Daniel 7, we find the same concepts, just with different symbols. When Babylon is listed in Daniel 2 as the head of gold, it is listed in Daniel 7 as the lion with wings. Now Medo-Persia is represented in Daniel 2 as the chest and arms of silver, and in Daniel 7 as the bear with 3 ribs lifted up on one side. Kind of an uneven situation there. And what history shows us is that Medo-Persia was a joint empire, and Persia was stronger than Media. And those 3 ribs represent 3 kings of this empire. After them came Greece, represented in Daniel 2 by the belly and thighs of brass, and represented in Daniel 7 by the leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. Wings in Bible prophecy represent speed, and history shows us that when Greece conquered all the different nations that it did, it had Alexander the Great as its head, and he did so within a very quick time period. He had conquered much of the known world by the age of 30. Now, sadly, Alexander the Great passed away, and there are some varying theories about how it happened, but the point is, he died. And his kingdom was split from the Greek Empire into 4 different smaller kingdoms. This is what is symbolized by the 4 heads of the leopard. Now, Rome is represented in Daniel 2 by the legs of iron, and in Daniel 7 by a terrible beast. When these visions were given, Rome was not yet in existence. But when Rome came into existence and began to conquer other nations, she did so with an iron fist. Interestingly, the different metals that are used to represent these kingdoms in Daniel 2 were significant metals used in those kingdoms. Babylon was the golden empire. Medo-Persia used silver for their financial system. Greece had their bronze armor. Rome used iron. Now the last kingdom represented in Daniel 2 is the feet of iron and clay. This is divided Europe. Like I said, Rome was not conquered from the outside. It disintegrated from the inside, and it kind of devolved into the different nations of medieval Europe. These are represented in Daniel 7 by the 10 horns. Now, by the time the Daniel 8 vision happened, Babylon had already been conquered, so they're not mentioned in that chapter. So the first animal we see is a ram with 2 horns, which represents Medo-Persia. The 2 horns in Bible prophecy, according to Daniel 7, represent kingdoms. Medo-Persia, Media and Persia, was a joint empire. Greece is represented in Daniel 8 by the he-goat. It had 1 massive horn that split into 4 horns. Again, representing Alexander the Great, that massive horn, and when he died, his 4 generals took over the kingdom. The legs of iron in Daniel 2, the terrible beast in Daniel 7, is represented by the little horn in Daniel 8. And Daniel 8 shows us that this little horn had 2 stages. First, it represents the terrible beast, the Iron Empire of Rome, pagan Rome. And when Rome began to disintegrate, the papacy comes along and says, hey, we'll take care of things. And Emperor Justinian actually made the Pope in charge of various things. Now, the 10 horns are not mentioned in Daniel chapter 8. Now, here's kind of a bird's eye view of that graphic. You can screenshot it. You can go to my other social media page and look at it there. But many people think that these different animals of Daniel chapters 7 and 8 represent different nations of Europe. No, they don't. Only the 10 horns in Daniel 7 represent Europe. Nothing else in Daniel 7 and 8 does. And this is how the Bible uses the principle called repeat and enlarge. Daniel 2 is a pretty basic, straightforward vision. And then Daniel 7 comes along, gives us the same lessons with more details. And then Daniel 8 gives us the same lessons as Daniel 2 and 7, but with even more details. What's interesting is Daniel 7 uses unclean beasts to symbolize the different nations that are symbolized in Daniel 2. Daniel 7 is largely from a kind of a secular history standpoint, whereas Daniel 8 uses clean beasts. Goats, for example, were used in the sacrificial system. And so the focus of Daniel 8 is largely spiritual and religious. This is why Daniel 8 mentions the judgment. We see the same concept in Revelation with the seven churches, the seven seals, and the seven trumpets. They all cover the same time periods of history, but from different angles. And by the way, if you're interested in a Bible study on the seven churches, seals, and trumpets, follow the link in my profile, and I have a short book that I wrote on those topics. You can find it on iBooks, and I think I have it on my Dropbox store.